Hey everyone, welcome to YouTube today on Monday, February 26th. It's a great day. I'm really excited to have you guys here, and we're going to get started very quickly. If you're just signing in, make sure you introduce yourself. And today we're going to be talking about making a living with permaculture. So I'm going to go through a presentation that I gave last year, and at the end we can talk all about what makes a permaculture livelihood, different ideas that I've had and other people have had on how to make a livelihood using permaculture. And to say a permaculture livelihood, what I'm really talking about is how do you make a living, more than just a living, while enhancing the ecosystem around you. So making everyone else's life better, making your life better, making the world better, making the ecology that you depend on better, all at the same time. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The presentation should take about 45 minutes if I stay on track. And so keep your questions till the end there. You're welcome to try and put them up there. I may not see it while we're going through the presentation today, but we will have time at the end to address any questions that you've got. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to get right into this. So I've given a lot of thought to creating a right livelihood, obviously because I've had to figure it out on my own, and it's tough sometimes. It can be really challenging to kind of sort those options and ideas out and to even know if it's possible. When I first got into permaculture, one of the things that I wanted to know was whether or not it was even feasible for me to make a living doing permaculture, making enough money to pay the bills essentially, and hopefully more than that. So this is a decade's worth of thinking about it. It's just a very high level conversation, so we can go into much more depth on any one of the different subjects. So we're just going to try and cover the main points, and then we can get into more detail towards the end. But basically, what is a right livelihood? Let's just talk a little bit about this. A right livelihood is something that basically aligns with a whole bunch of your life's purpose, and everybody defines that a little bit differently. Your ethics, so what you believe and to be right, I guess. Ethics, again, can be dependent on who you are and what you believe. In permaculture, we have a core set of ethics. So right care of people, care of earth, and return of surplus are kind of the core tenets in permaculture. Your talents, so what are you really good at? What happens? What can you do effortlessly? And then the market. And I've got a little star there under the market, and we'll hit that a little bit later. But basically, sometimes the market just doesn't exist. And so if it doesn't exist, how do you manage that? So we're going to get into that today. So overview. Today we're going to talk about where we find ourselves today in the world, why right livelihood, and the myth and our humanity. So what are the myths that exist within our society, and how do we how does understanding these myths change the way that we can be in the world, essentially? My story until now, and I'll use me as an analogy for what is possible for you if you guys are interested in right livelihood or creating a livelihood with permaculture itself. And what my right livelihood looks like right now, and so how I make a living, and what I do to make a living, all the different things and different facets that I do, and then some principles and processes to help you get there. And at the end, we can talk about, take some questions. Sorry, the words aren't coming to me today. Take some questions at the end and see if we can't dig into this a little bit deeper. So where we find ourselves now. So humans are not inherently destructive. Our actions are the result of a lack of feedback and a limiting belief that one person cannot make massive change. And this is something that has taken a long time for me to come to as an individual, as a business owner, as a change maker. And the messaging that we receive on a daily basis really can be broken down into something very, very simple, which is something that you guys have never put words to, but have thought about. And it's the idea that we are a scourge, or we're destructive, or that we can't act in a positive way. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Now, there's plenty of evidence to indicate that this statement might be true. We're looking at a picture of the oil sands in northern Alberta right here. You know, we could look at mining photos, we could look at rainforest deforestation, we could look at any number of destructive images in place of this. And I'm not trying to pick on the oil sands in northern Alberta. We all drive our vehicles using fossil fuels, most of us still do. You know, there are things that we need from the planet, and sometimes we have not necessarily figured out the best way to get them from the planet. This is just a local example. And I'm not actually against oil sands either. That's the other interesting thing that people are kind of surprised by. What I am against is the extraction of minerals and resources from the planet where we haven't figured out what the back end remediation is going to look like. And there's a bunch of PR around oil sands that talk about how they've remediated this huge chunk of land and all this stuff. But in reality, we know the history of Canadian mining, and we know that when a mining company no longer has the ability to make a profit, they typically publicize the problem, like giant mines up in the Northwest Territories, which basically means that they hand it off to the government, which is basically the same as handing it off to the public to pay for the damages. So the world has benefited from this resource, and the corporations who mine them benefited from the resource, but the public, the locale in Canada, are the ones that have to pay the penalty. So, like I said, there's plenty of evidence that could indicate that this is actually true, that humans are inherently destructive. However, what I would argue is that we're just lacking feedback. And so I don't think there's any coincidence that the people that run these mines, whether that's the oil sands or a gold mine or a diamond mine or a copper mine, they typically do not work from the mine. Okay, they typically work in a high office tower in some glamorous city. They get paid large amounts of money, and it essentially shuts off the feedback mechanism so that they don't really have to think about what it is that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And most of the time when they're actually planning systems like this out, it's being planned out on a drawing. So there's a lack of feedback between what's being planned and what's actually going on. And because of this, that's one part of it. Because of this, people can't make informed decisions about what is actually going on and how they should be operating in their life. Now, when you bring it down to the consumer level, when somebody's filling up their vehicle with gasoline or somebody's building a house with timber, there's a lack of knowledge or information about what has had to happen in order to bring that timber to their house, or what has had to occur in order to get that gasoline into their tank. And so the best analogy that I can give to all of this is that if every one of you had a little pipe coming out on top of the little light switch in any one of your bedrooms or any one of your rooms in your house, and that pipe was connected to the local coal plant or the local natural gas power generating facility, and every time you turn that light on, you get a little puff of black smoke in the face to remind you that action of turning that light on actually put more coal dust into the atmosphere, we would think twice about turning that on, because there was direct feedback. We would have to breathe that coal dust in directly, and we would know that that light came at some sort of an expense. Now, we know that that's not physically realistic to do, but my point in saying that is the reason that most people do not make decisions that are good for the environment and also good for 7 generations down the road is that there's a lack of feedback. Our sewage treatment plants are placed far away. Our power plants are placed far away. Our oil and gas facilities are placed far away. And so we really don't understand the consequences of those actions. Now, embedded in all of that, there's this other belief that we can't make change as one person. And this is completely false. And so my career over the last 10 years has been dedicated to trying to show people how one person can actually make a massive change. And here's the silver lining with all of that. you can make a massive change and make a livelihood at the same time. And if you're good at business, you can make a really good livelihood. And in fact, I think the engineers that get paid to fix, or the engineers that get paid to develop these types of facilities, that get paid all this money, the engineers that actually go to repair the earth should be paid the same or more. We just have to create a market for it. And the market is starting to emerge right now. And there are enormous opportunities that exist within so many different realms of the earth repair space. And so that's what today is all about. So why? I really like this quote. There's no easy formula for determining right and wrong livelihood, but it is essential to keep the question alive. To return the sense of dignity and honor to manhood, we have to stop pretending that we can make a living at something that is trivial or destructive and still have a sense of legitimate self-worth. A society in which vocation and job are separated for most people gradually creates an economy that is often devoid of spirit, one that frequently fills our pocketbooks at the cost of emptying our souls. And the Environment by Sam Keen. So that's why this is important. And it's amazing, most people that attend our programs are depressed at the state of the world, hate their job, and feel hopeless. Our education process and supportive community help permaculture grads start their own businesses so that they can live out their dreams while making the world a better place. And if you're ever interested in what our grads are doing as a result of the permaculture design program, I encourage you to check out the grad section on our website. We try and feature a couple of grads every month, show people what they're doing, and hopefully also bring them some business as well. We want them to succeed, and so if we can ever bring any help market their business or inform people of what they're doing within different locales right across Canada and the United States, that's something we love to do. But this really explains why people take our programs. It's to find a right livelihood and find a community of people that are supportive of that right livelihood as well. So I'm a really big fan of myth. I've talked a little bit about it already. And if you've been watching my programs, you've probably seen this slide in the past. And there's three basic myths here. There's the sword of Damocles, which is the one on the left. There's the phoenix in the middle. And then there's the hydra on the right-hand side. And so the basic premise here, the sword of Damocles talks about how it's actually a poor person who's friends with a king who has enormous amount of jealousy towards the king, because it seems as though the king has this really fantastic life. And so the king says, you want my life? You can have it. And so this poor person takes over the throne and then realizes that there's a sword hanging over top of his head, being suspended to the ceiling with the hair of a horse. And so at any moment that sword could drop on him. And so the benefit of being a king comes at great expense. And this myth really kind of talks about fragility. The phoenix is a myth of a mythical bird that can be killed and then it turns to ashes and then it's reborn out of the ashes. And so this is a myth of resilience. And the hydra is this concept of a mythical monster that when one head gets cut off, 5 or 6 more emerge. And so right now we find ourselves as a civilization more towards the fragile and maybe even into the kind of resilient, depending on where you look, mythology. And the other reason to create right livelihood is that while our jobs might feel secure, they really aren't. They're really fragile at best, and they are subject to the whim of our employers and subject to the whim of the market. And so the idea behind right livelihood and creating a right livelihood is to move out of that realm of fragility. Now, not everybody is meant to own a business. Not everybody is meant to necessarily be an entrepreneur, but most of us should have the ability to make right livelihood. And so myth is a really important component in both society and in our own lives as well. And generally what we believe tends to become true. And so if you don't believe that right livelihood is possible, you'll make sure that that becomes the case. And so within Right Livelihood and within permaculture, we're always trying to find ways to make a living, improve the planet, and also increase our resilience at the exact same time. So over the last 10 years, some of you guys here probably know my story, but we've traveled the world. We went around and saw how other people did things, both in the energy sphere, in the food sphere, even how they raised children, to be honest. I mean, we really questioned everything that we believed over that period of time. I think travel is one of the best uses of fossil fuel that you could possibly ever do, because it lets you, it really gets you outside of your own box. It lets you see how other people see the world. And through all of our traveling, we realized that we couldn't go back to just being employees. I mean, there's possibility that one day I'll be an employee again, but it'll be on different terms. And so essentially, when we came back, we started a Permablitz network. We started creating landscapes for people, and we started trying to build community around this concept of permaculture. And what I'll say is that when I got back from all of my traveling from right across North America, there was no such thing as permaculture in Alberta. In fact, I remember driving over the border from British Columbia into Alberta, and Alberta's kind of like the redneck province of Canada. And I was looking at my wife and saying, what are we doing coming back to Alberta? Like, what is this? Like, well, we should be in BC or something. You know, we've done all this traveling. We know all these things now. We should go live where other progressive people live. And I couldn't have been further from the truth, to be totally honest with you. And people that give Alberta a bad rap as the redneck province of Canada really don't know what they're talking about at all. Alberta has more in the closet greenies than anywhere else in Canada. I'm convinced of it. And as soon as we started teaching and doing stuff, specifically in Calgary here, but also right across the province, it was amazing how many people came out of the woodwork and wanted food forests and wanted to put in gardens and wanted renewable energy systems. It was just unbelievable. This place was ripe for change. And so when I had that little asterisk on the market on the first slide there, what I was saying there is that, you know, Right Livelihood depends on a market, but just because a market doesn't exist doesn't mean a market can't be built. And so through permablitzes, now somebody asked me recently to do a little bit of a talk on permablitzes. Permablitzes are basically community supported installation, an installation mechanism. Let me say that again. A permablitz is a community supported installation mechanism. So basically the idea is that if you want a permaculture design on your property, you can host a permablitz. And so the idea behind a permablitz is that it has to be a permaculture design. We get the community to come onto your property. We implement that design in one day. And the only thing that the homeowner has to pay is for the materials and for the design. And then they are required to feed the participants and feed and provide them with drink. And then usually there's a bit of a party at the end of the day. It's a wonderful experience. Obviously, if it's the first time a permablitz has ever happened in a city, somebody has to be the guinea pig to start it off with, because what we ask is that people who want permablitzes into the future have to volunteer on at least 2 others before we will allow them to have their own permablitz. And so through every permablitz that I did, I got another customer, another client for design. I ended up getting a couple other people that wanted permablitzes. I ended up getting students coming into my programs that were interested in learning about permaculture. And it was really great because I didn't actually invent this concept of permablitz. It was actually Dan Palmer and Adam Grubb from Very Edible Gardens in Melbourne, Australia, and they actually created a permablitz manual on how to host your own permablitz for both the host and for the designer. Permablitz. Let me just put that into the chat window there. And so through all of these permablitzes, we filled our programs up. We taught people about permaculture. We started putting these food forests right across Calgary, which was amazing. And they're still growing like crazy. And so we created a market. And so sometimes you have to have creative ways to actually build markets around an idea that doesn't exist anymore. And so the good news is that there's no competition when you do something that nobody else has done before. The bad news is that you have to build it. So if there's no example of it, you really need to get savvy with your marketing and your communication to build a demand around it. And hopefully it's a good enough idea that will catch on. And it really did. We've ended up having kids. That's been the best choice of my life. And that's Rowan and Naomi there. And we completely retrofitted our own properties as a demonstration to show other people what's possible. And we've also been involved in several other larger properties like the groundswell project that you see right up here, which is a 1/4 acre food forest, 3,000 square foot passive solar greenhouse, and an outdoor community kitchen and teaching space. So what I do for a living, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for more people to do this for a living, although I wanted to say something that you don't do permaculture, you use it within what you do. So I'm an engineer, and specifically a mechanical engineer, and I use mechanical engineering and permaculture together. So if you weren't an engineer, you were an architect, or you were a plumber, or you were an electrician, or if you're a daycare provider, it doesn't matter what it is that you do, you can use this concept of permaculture within what you do. And so I try and find really unique ways to use some of the methodologies that we talk about in permaculture in the mechanical systems and the biological systems that we deploy. And so a student of mine came to me a few years ago and said, hey, I want to put a ready-to-move building up onto my parents' farm, which is essentially a trailer, or it's a prefabricated house is another word for it. And he said, I want to bring some ecological features into it. I don't have enough resources to build my own house, so I'm wondering if there's some stuff that we can do in the installation of this new house that will improve its effectiveness. And I said, yeah, there probably is. So we designed him a septic field that took that septic effluent and it turned that waste product into an opportunity to grow trees. We figured out how to basically capture all the thermal energy inside of the attic. And I'll do a video on this here coming up in the next few weeks. And so when we looked at this house, we realized that the attic was pretty small. Attics get really hot. And so for the last 3 years, I've been monitoring the attic temperature in this house. It gets up to 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, which is, I think it's like 150, 140, maybe 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, really hot up there. And that energy typically just gets sucked out with a fan. And so instead of sucking that energy out, what we realized is that we already have the embodied cost of a fan to suck that energy out. Instead of sucking it out of the attic, why don't we push it underground? And so we actually created pickups in the attic, and we pull the air down into the crawl space. We pull it down from over here as well into a manifold, and then that air moves through these pipes underground. You'll notice that it's insulated on top of that. And as that hot air, that 60 to 70 degrees Celsius air moves through the ground underneath the house heats up. So all summer long, the ground underneath this building is heating up. Now the air comes out of the barrel, or out of the manifold right here. In this case, it's a barrel, and it gets pushed through the crawl space. So now the air is cool, it's dehumidified, and it gets pushed through the crawl space, so it actually reduces the humidity, and then it gets pushed out of a vent over on this side. And so we're not using any additional energy to do this project because it already was going to have a roof fan. We're cooling the attic off, and then we're also dumping heat underground. And so this is an example of how permaculture and mechanical engineering can marry together. And that's where I've created a niche for myself, doing unique projects that kind of bring the thinking of both domains together in a really unique way. Another project that we just recently worked on was a low energy off-grid acreage. And so this is just south of Calgary, and it's 5 acres right here. And there's all sorts of really neat features on this acreage. I probably won't have time to go through all of them, but I will be doing a case study on this in the future. So if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you'll want to make sure that you're subscribed to it if you want to get updates. And so this house here is a passive house. It's passive house certified, which means that it uses about 12,000 BTUs of energy per hour, which may not mean anything to you if you don't know what a BTU is, but essentially most houses that are running on propane require a 1,000-gallon propane bullet, and that would be expected to be refilled once or twice per winter in our climate. This bullet requires a fill every 15 to 20 years just for the house because it uses so little energy. So it's about the same amount of energy that you'd use to boil a small pot of water. So the house itself has solar thermal on the roof, and that solar thermal heats the domestic hot water. It also provides supplementary heat for space heating in the house. We collect all the rainwater off of this roof. We've got water that moves through the property. So we've got passively irrigated food forest right here. We collect all the water off of the shop. The shop itself also has solar photovoltaics on the roof, which produce the majority of the electricity required by the building. It's got a passive solar greenhouse and root cellar over here. I'll also be doing a case study on this particular greenhouse as well. So turns out that a greenhouse, a root cellar, and a canning kitchen work really well together. So inside of here, there's going to be a food forest, a wood-fired hot tub, and a canning kitchen, and then all their food storage. This greenhouse also has earth tubes for air preheating. We've got a shelter belt that helps to, that uses some of the septic effluent to grow trees. We've got pasture for livestock. We've got an aquacultural pond for fighting fire, but also hydrating the property, as well as a beach and a small little fire circle down here. And there's also some other really unique little features in here as well. Like, for example, we've got a PEX pipe that goes underneath the driveway, and this preheats all the air coming into the house. And so essentially when fresh air is coming into the house, we've got a small little runaround loop that runs glycol underneath the driveway. And so instead of preheating winter air from -40 Celsius, we can bring that air temperature up to, you know, -4, -5, -6 degrees Celsius. So a lot of the lifting actually is done through a low-tech geothermal heat pump. And it's not actually a heat pump at all. It's a product called ComfoFond. And I'm happy to talk about that at the end if you guys want to learn more about using low-tech geothermal energy to preheat and or pre-cool your building. So lots of sophistication built into this property. They do offer paid tours. If you want to go and look at it and you're from Alberta, I can put you in touch with them. Another property that is not constructed yet, but we worked on north of Calgary. There, a couple wanted to start a malting farm operation, and so there's a lot of demand for micro malting right now, and they wanted to basically provide for some of that demand, but also integrate it into a larger farm system. And so we came in and designed this property, at least the preliminary portions of the property, with a combination of shelter belts, fencing systems, ponds, as well as a unique way of managing the wastewater effluent coming off of the malting plant. So malting plants produce a wastewater product that is really high in nutrients, because when you steep barley, it produces this really nitrogen and potentially phosphorus rich effluent that needs to be dealt with. Now, there's no fecal coliforms in there because we're not commingling it with sewage. And so we saw this as an opportunity to use some of that effluent to rapidly grow shelter belts. And so we used a combination of swales, and we created, on number 4 here, we created these, we called them toilet tanks, but they weren't really toilet tanks. They're just above grade effluent storage dugouts, essentially, that we could accumulate water over the course of the spring and the winter, and then flush them essentially into swales on contour at different levels of the property to get these shelter belts growing, because the property was quite exposed. And so we used that water to grow this crazy shelter belt all the way around, again, from a permaculture principle perspective, growing edge and turning waste into resource. And the problem is also the solution, to build this 80-acre malting facility as well as permaculture farm. So again, using that concept of turning waste into resource and bringing engineering and permaculture together. This is a property that we worked on just recently, another, I think it's another 80 acres. And so again, looking at, this was an empty pasture, so looking at how we could reduce evaporation, bring the farm operation together, bring the business operation together, bring the mechanical components. There's a whole bunch of heating systems that were required here. So bringing in a solar thermal central boiler, and re-insulating the house, and basically just making this whole property robust and resilient. We get a lot of clients that contact us that want resilience in their life. And so as an engineer and a permaculture practitioner, we can kind of bring all the mathematics of engineering together with the resilience thinking of permaculture and marry them together. And we design things like root cellars, we design resilient heating systems that will work in any situation, resilient power systems that will run in any situation. And then we bring that together with low energy agroecological solutions, which is what you're looking at right here. And essentially number 6 is describing a silvopasture cropping system that will allow for the grazing of cattle, potentially even pigs, chickens, under the shade of trees to reduce evaporation, to provide for a resilient food supply that does not require massive amounts of irrigation in order to keep it operational. In addition to that, managing all the wastewater on this property, as well as putting in an additional pond right in here, was proposed to be used for firefighting and also deep hydration along this slope right here, which is the main fire sector or fire risk on the property. So again, when I started my career in permaculture, we were doing permablitzes, and now we've kind of moved into this resilience agroecology space that didn't really exist. And to my knowledge, not many other people offer this service. And so sometimes if the market doesn't exist, you just have to go out and build it. And you don't necessarily know, how it's going to get to that place. You have to have a vision as to where you're going, but you have to trust that you'll take the right steps along the way to make that progress. So my epiphany was that luck plays a large role in finding right livelihood. However, right livelihood rarely finds you unless you go and seek it. So it's that whole idea of the art of the start. Just get started, do something. Take a step towards this vision that you've got, because if you don't do it, chances are it's not just going to fall into your lap. You have to stack luck in your favor. So number 1, and the first place to start, we did a session with Javan Bernakovich last week on setting holistic goals. And so this is something that we do with all of our clients. We always start every consulting process off with a holistic goal process, where we will understand how your life has to be in order to be successful, in your opinion. And so that's one of the ways that you can figure out your life's purpose. You can figure out your ethics, and sometimes you can even get to your talents. However, sometimes the talents are harder to get to, and so you may need to go into a deeper ancillary or complementary process. Again, Javan Bernakovich has a program called Life Design, where he helps to get to your core talents and gifts. He's got this natural gift assessment that he does, and it's pretty brilliant. So sometimes we need to go into that level of depth to understand where that opportunity lies. And then the market is kind of, again, if it doesn't exist, you have to build it. If it does exist, which is even better, then we can find that little intersection point in the middle, and that's typically where your right livelihood is going to live. So another principle that's really important when you're starting your own business or trying to figure out where your right livelihood is, learn how to be frugal. I noticed that Nick is on the call here. One of the resources that Nick gave me a while ago was something called Mr. Money Mustache. And if someone can put his website into the chat window, that'd be great. He's all about frugality. In fact, I think his story is that he wanted to retire by the time he was 30 or 35 or something like that, just through being really frugal with his money. And I really admire his whole ethos around that. So check out his website. We found our own unique ways to be frugal with all of this stuff. And so one of the things that Michelle and I did was, when we were working in the oil and gas industry, we always lived well below our means. So we lived on very, very little money. We drove a used car. I think it had 500,000 kilometers on it by the time we finished with it. And then we passed it on to one of our employees. And it's still running today, I think. we always tried to have a 1-year parachute, and it's even better if you can have a 2-year parachute. One of the ways that we cut our burn rate was we house sat. So we actually lived in other people's houses, and sometimes they even paid us to live in their house, because if you leave your house for a long period of time, your insurance becomes void. You need to have an active human living in it. And so we house sat. That saved us a lot of money. We moonlit. So when we were still working in the oil and gas industry, we worked for other people at night in the industries that we were interested in working in. So I remember one of my first projects, I worked on a massive district solar heating system, which is essentially just a centralized solar heating plant that was going to go into the town of Vulcan, just southeast of Calgary. So I tried to go and get experience that I knew would be valuable into my future. And I've tried to find mentors that would take me on, even if it meant I had to work for free in order to get that experience. So I was really hungry for the information. We relied heavily on family. We tried to understand wants and needs within people. So what is the core driver for people wanting permaculture? And we tried to focus on experience instead of material. And so that's where we decided to travel around the world and re-educate ourselves and provide additional knowledge to what it was that we thought we needed in order to succeed in this space. And the way that we were able to travel so much was through saving and always living below our means. Be courageous. So ignore pessimistic people. Take calculated risks. You know, it was amazing how many people told me that I would fail at permaculture in Alberta. I had at least 3 people who tried and told me not to bother because it was just too hard. You have to, in this world, there are leaders and there are followers. And it's scary as hell to be a leader. It's scary as hell to go out and do things that other people don't think won't work. And it's scary as hell to constantly be trying to push your canoe up the stream. But it's important. And because you know that if you don't do it, if this is important to you, that you're always going to wonder what it would have been like to do it. So you have to have the courage to trust in yourself. This is one of the hardest skills to learn, and I'm still learning it every single day. There are still days that I wake up and I'm terrified. I'm terrified that I'm going to fail. Okay, right now we're going through a really interesting scenario where Google has decided to delist our website. So we're basically invisible on the internet, and it's scary. You know, it's scary not to think about failure sometimes, but it really comes back down to that internal core of, do I have the knowledge and skills and the grit to be able to work through this issue? And as long as you believe in yourself, it doesn't matter what anybody else says to you. That's the most important thing to remember. You got to try new things out. You got to stay flexible and constantly be willing to innovate and trial out new opportunities as they come your way, knowing that a lot of them are going to fail. And that failure is actually just as important as success. And in some ways, it's more important because in the world of business and right livelihood, it's much easier to figure out where the walls are by banging your head into them than trying to guess. You just need to know when you go into this that you're going to make mistakes. And it's the mistakes that help guide you towards the successes, if that makes sense. The other thing is that people will tell you that you got to make these long business plans and you got to plan out 5 years in advance. You will never know if your plan is actually going to work. And so you have to have a vision. That's really important. You have to know where you're going. That's where the holistic context is really important. And that's probably one of the most valuable tools for creating vision, in my opinion, because it's flexible and it works with the changing environment as you move through life. But if you try and plan too many steps in advance, you're gonna make mistakes because things change constantly. They're so dynamic. So just plan a couple steps and trust that you'll figure it out along the way. Even though if you don't know what's going to happen after step 2 or 3, one of the things Bill Mollison said is that you'll know that you're doing the right thing if resources start pooling around you. So if you go and make a step towards something that you think is totally crazy, but all of a sudden, you know, your mom comes out of the woodwork and says, oh, that's amazing, I really want to support you. Or people start coming to your workshops, or they start showing up at your permablitzes. You know that you're doing the right thing because people are coming around and supporting you. As I spoke about earlier, travel is really important. It challenges your cultural beliefs and myths, which I think is so important. You find new ways of doing things and being. You break old patterns, you bring old ideas into new contexts, you cultivate a global network, and you experience new opportunities and ideas. I can't think of a much better way of growing yourself than traveling. And if you've got kids, they can benefit from that too. Be curious. One of the most important skills that I've ever learned from my children is this idea of curiosity. And if you've got a kid, you'll know what I'm talking about. But when your child comes up to you and says, well, why this and why that and why this and why that, I've noticed that every single time I get into a why conversation with my children, I end up in quantum mechanics. It always ends up at like string theory or quantum mechanics. It's like finally you get to the most basic level that humans currently understand. It's like, well, that's because of string theory, or that's because of quantum mechanics. But you can take that concept of curiosity, and instead of getting annoyed at your child because they keep asking you whys, which I see a lot of parents doing, you can use it as a prompt or a reminder saying, you know, I really need to increase that level of curiosity in my own life. Why don't I ask the same number of questions anymore? Why have I stopped bringing in new information into my system? Curiosity is very, very important. And when you're trying to find a right livelihood, curiosity is very important. Seek mentorship and mastery. And this was not something that I necessarily consciously did, although I ended up doing it. And so now I tell a lot of the young people that come through our programs how important mastery and mentorship is. And so these are two books that I recommend every human being read for a couple of reasons. You might be older and not seeking mentorship anymore, which is fine. And so that's what the book Mastery is all about. But you may wonder where your life is going. You may wonder why you made the decisions that you made. And so Mastery is basically a collection of short biographies of some of the smartest people in humanity. And what you realize is that they were all black swans. They were all black sheep. They were all people that took these strange paths to get to where they were. People like Mozart, Beethoven, Benjamin Franklin, Einstein. And you realize that in order for them to get to where they were going, they had to do all these strange things that were off on tangents that nobody could really understand from the outside. So Mastery is a wonderful read. Again, if you're old and not looking for mentorship, you can probably provide mentorship for other people. I think we need to have more mentorship in our society than we do right now. And so every year I try and take on at least one mentee to help people around me to further themselves. It helps me further myself as well. It's amazing how mentorship, like being a mentor, I get immense value back from my mentees as well. They challenge my own beliefs in my thinking. They keep me young and flexible. And then The Art of War by Stephen Pressfield, an amazing book, absolutely amazing if you're thinking about going into your own right livelihood. Get this book. You will thank me for it. He speaks or he writes in a way that no other author does. I love this book. In fact, I'm going to start reading it again here soon. I try and read it once a year because it's just so profound. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Lastly, I think meditation is really important. Excuse me. I think meditation, so let me say that again. Lastly, I think meditation is really important. Not necessarily for spiritual ends, but that's one of the things that can occur as a result of it, but for keeping a clear mind. You know, especially as we live in this age of insane communications, constantly being pinged, it's hard to really get deep into what it is that you need, and to clear the mind out, to get rid of all of the noise. If you guys want to talk about meditation, we can talk about that at the end. I practice a form of Vipassana meditation, which is a meditation that was originally developed by the Buddha. It's not Buddhism, it's not a religion, it's just a way of introspection. It's just a way of sitting down and observing what's going on in your body. And it's super profound. So I highly recommend checking that out. So conclusion. And some of you will have heard me talk about this quote, but I think it's just absolutely amazing. Process is more important than outcome. When the outcome drives the process, we'll only ever go to where we've already been. If process drives the outcome, we may not know where we're going, but we'll know that we want to be there. And so use some of these steps as your process. Use the holistic context. Use all of the different steps that we talked about in this presentation as a process to follow and steps to check back in on. And if you're doing that, you'll end up going to where you need to be. Sometimes it's really hard to plot a course as to where we're going to end up being specifically, but we can create brush strokes and we can create ideas and generally go in a specific direction, but we require that process to be able to check back in on to make sure that things are going in the right direction. So hopefully you guys found that interesting. I'm going to open it up for questions now, if you guys have any questions. And we can talk about different types of right livelihood, different types of jobs that you can, or businesses that you can start within permaculture. While we're waiting for questions to come up, I think I saw a couple of questions in the queue there. If I can just get you guys to hit the like button down below and share it. I also wanted to let you guys know that we have a free e-course available. And you can check that out. It's in the show notes right now. It says, let us show you how to bring permaculture into your life. Get our free e-course. And so you can click on that and it'll take you to our free e-course page if you haven't already taken it. Highly recommend it. It's a great little introduction to what permaculture can do in your life. And it's typically included in our permaculture design courses. So I'm just going to scroll back up here to the top and just start going through questions. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat window to the right hand side as I go through these questions here. Nick asked about, do trees and septic systems mix? Nick, sometimes it depends. There are different ways to build septic systems. And so there's a class of septic system called an at-grade system, which is specifically designed to grow in forests. If the forest doesn't exist, then you can actually build the forest for the septic system, essentially. Tranquil Garden says, curious to know what the ROI, return on investment, is. So Tranquil Garden, what is the return on investment that you're specifically speaking about? For what project were you referring to? Field B, Richard Perkins, Ridgedale Farm YouTube series talks about our RECO farmers market concept being practiced in Scandinavia. Can you please help us discover more about this in upcoming weeks? Sure, I don't know what the RECO farmers market concept is, so maybe you can give me a little more information on that and I'd be happy to discuss it. You got a comment below. RECO is Swedish colloquial speech meaning something equivalent to just, fair, or decent. So I'm assuming that means fair trade, maybe? I'm not sure. I need a little more information on it. Aaron, just joining from Leduc. Great, nice to have you, Aaron. Field B, you should have thousands of attendees here. I didn't know how one could get delisted. What is the appeal process? So yeah, it's interesting. We actually have typically have a lot of traffic on the internet. And we're not really too sure why Google did this, but Google has classified vergepermaculture.ca as pure spam, which means that we don't show up in search anymore. And it's been really devastating to us. And it's a little bit scary, to be honest. I'm not really too sure what's going to perspire out of it. We have appealed to Google 2 weeks ago, and we're going to have to appeal again because it raises all sorts of really interesting questions. I mean, one of them is, what does resilient communication look like? As the world becomes more and more consolidated with fewer and fewer corporations, what does it mean to be able to have a resilient network? And I'm really starting to see the value of old hat communication techniques. So instead of just relying on our phone and text message and email, literally going out and meeting and talking to people again. I mean, I know that sounds crazy to have to actually say it, but and I'm just going to put a plug in. This weekend here in Calgary, we have the Cabin Fever event, which is happening at the Crescent Heights Community Hall. And it's a great time to come out and meet the permaculture community here in Calgary, which is vibrant and booming. And so you can, I'll just actually find the Cabin Fever event here and share it with you guys, because I think it's worth mentioning so that you guys know how to find it. So if you are in the Calgary or Alberta or even Eastern BC and you're looking to be part of the Calgary permaculture community, I highly encourage checking that out. So I don't know what's going to happen with it. It's definitely hurting us a lot, and we're working our way through it, and we trust that we're going to be able to figure it all out. So I'll keep you guys abreast as that happens. Frankie says, yes, have read Robert Greene. Yeah, he's a great guy. Got some really interesting books. Tranquil Garden, ROI on the resource collection one with the passive house. Thanks, Rob. So that's a great question, Tranquil Garden. And so you can build passive houses that are really inexpensive. You can build them the ones that are really expensive. And this comes back down to your holistic context. So what's important to you? A lot of our clients don't look at ROI in the same way that you or I might or other people might. A lot of our clients are really interested in resilience. And so in the same way that when you buy an insurance policy for life or for sickness or critical illness or whatever your insurance policy is, your car, there's no ROI on insurance, at least most insurance policies. And so one of my biggest fears as an engineer living in a cold climate is what happens if the power goes out for long periods of time? What happens if the gas turns off? These seem like irrational fears, but when you understand how the oil and gas industry works, when you understand how the electrical industry, how little resilience there is in it right now, it would only take a power outage for a couple of weeks in Alberta for most of houses to freeze solid, their pipes to burst, and to have massive mold issues. And a lot of people would not make it through that. There is no resilience in our heating systems. There is no resilience in our power systems. And so a lot of our clients are aware of these things. They're highly educated people, but they don't necessarily know how to take that next step to make sure that they're putting their money into tangible items that will ensure against issues like the loss of power or the loss of gas or the loss of water. And so that's where we built our company, Adaptive Habitat, which specializes in resilient homes, acreages, and farms. So we specialize in resilient water, heat, power, and food systems that will operate in any situation, pretty much. So typically ROI is not a conversation that I have with my clients. Aaron Oligny, I think. Have you had any success building off-grid systems and not having to hook up to regular utilities? If so, have you done anything in rural Edmonton area? I've not done anything in the Edmonton area, but the property that we shared in this presentation is off-grid. We designed their heating system. We advised on their power system. We advised or designed their water system. We designed their septic system. And I have different thoughts about off-grid versus not off-grid, and we could potentially do a video if people are interested in learning about off-grid systems for food, energy, water, waste, if that's something of interest to folks. So yes, I've been involved in them. I have quite a bit of experience in that whole realm in all of the areas that I talked about, and would be happy to answer any other questions around that. Nick, thank you. I'm finding it challenging to decide which business to start given my context. Town which doesn't allow composting, fruit trees, and etc. Nick, I have the most perfect business for Canmore. Like, absolutely, we should talk. In fact, Nick, because I know you live only an hour away from Calgary, you should come to Cabin Fever this weekend and we can talk. And I can help you with that. Jack, great stuff as usual. Any suggestions for market testing ideas without spending time or money? Thanks, Rob. Yeah, this is a really important thing, is how do you test to see if there's a market for the opportunity that you're trying to start? And the best way to do that is to actually interview people. So once you know what your passions and your strengths are and what you're interested in, then you should go out and seek 15, 20, 30, 50 people that you can talk to and ask questions for 20 minutes. So go and seek thought leaders in specific spaces. So that could be in any number of places, generally people that own problems. So managers, CEOs, accountants, people that see these problems on a day-to-day basis, and see if you can get an interview with them for 15 or 20 minutes and ask them really hard questions. And they'll go and tell you all the opportunities that you never even thought about that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And if you can find a solution to their problems and you find enough people with the same problems, you've got a business. Now, the trick is figuring out that intersection point between where people have problems and where there's an opportunity or market for it. And do you have the skills, strengths, and desires to go and solve it? So that's the best way of starting a business if you can. Sometimes, though, we have these crazy harebrained ideas like starting a battery-powered car company where there was no market for it whatsoever, and building it essentially. So it depends on which way you want to come at the problem. Richard Russ, talking to people now, you are being crazy. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Field B, as an engineer in Canada, you're probably familiar with a solar district heating system of 100 houses, maybe called Eagle's Nest. There's a central thermal mass silo, which proves most heating. Yeah, that's in Okotoks, and it's called Drake Landing. And so close, not quite eagle. I think it's a duck, and instead of a nest, it's a landing. We were indirectly involved in that project, and it's pretty neat. There's things about it that I think they would probably change. And we can definitely talk about that in a future show. But basically, they meet, I think, 80 to 90% of their thermal energy requirements through solar thermal systems that were mounted on garages. So pretty neat little project. Thanks. I agree. Resilience is important. Lady Fortuna Adams. I'm 70-year-old disabled widow on a 10th acre suburban lot. Use permaculture to grow fruits and berries and annual veggies. Raise rabbits and chickens. Any ideas or suggestions for me? That's a really tough question to answer. I'd need something a little bit more specific, Lady Fortuna. What are you trying to do? What are your weak links? What are you not achieving that you wish to achieve? If you can give me a bit more information, I can potentially give you some advice. Nick, sounds great. Aaron, would definitely be interested in off-grid versus on-grid systems video chat. Okay, well, we can maybe do a video on off-grid versus on-grid systems, maybe next week. Frankie Robertson, check out Boss of the Swamp on YouTube. Aaron Ogle. Okay, perfect. Tanya, what are some examples of permaculture-based business? So there's lots of them out there, guys. We've got, anything to do with composting, basically. As the world moves and realizes that we can no longer put organics into the landfill, any kind of composting, whether it's worms or just static composting or windrow composting, or doing something like Carl Hammer, composting with chickens or composting with pigs, anything in the waste to resource industry is going to be important. Anything to do with rainwater harvesting is going to be a huge industry in the next decade or two. Anything to do with gray water, if you live in a province or state that allows for gray water harvesting. And if you wanted to get into gray water and it was not legal yet, I would get into the septic industry and start designing septic fields. There are green versions of septic fields out there, and nobody likes thinking about poop or sewage. And so if you, excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. If you get into the wastewater industry, you'll be first in line when there are more progressive options that emerge, and you can even start to lobby for that type of change. Anything in the low energy building building retrofit, low energy building construction. I think solar photovoltaics is kind of past. I think you can potentially still get in. There's going to be a lot of solar happening, but there's a lot of people already in that industry, so you got to be a little bit careful, and hopefully you can find a unique way to get into that industry if you're not already in it. I think anything in the broadacre water harvesting and drought proofing is valuable. Ponds, swales. I believe that if you look at agriculture, I mean, we've never had fewer farmers in the world. The farmers that still exist are in their 60s and 70s, and they're about to retire. There is very, very little local food. I think if you actually did an assessment of how much local food is available on the market right now, it's almost zero. So local food is, and local healthy, organic, regenerative, beyond organic type food is going to be more valuable than we can possibly imagine. It's only going to take one massive food shortage, which we're not very far away from as a civilization, to completely create chaos in the food system. So anything in food is going to be of value. I could do an entire show just on regenerative enterprises that are possible. Christine, 2 places in Kamloops that use geothermal, one east of Kamloops called Orchard Walk and another on the reserve. So yeah, Christine, I'm generally not a fan of geothermal heat pumps, but there are scenarios where they make sense. And we could do a whole show just on when you should and shouldn't use geothermal heat pumps. By the way, guys, if there's specific topics that you want me to talk about on YouTube, leave it in my chat window, send me an email. Let me know. I'm always looking to know what you guys are interested to learn. I've got so much information up here. Love to share it with you guys. Juanita, yes, I do expect speaking engagements. You can get in touch with us at info@vergepermaculture.ca or go to my website, vergepermaculture.ca, and send us an email. Would love to chat with you about that. Aaron, do you have any info on biofilter septic systems? I have tons of information on septic systems. And again, it comes back down to context and what it is you're specifically trying to do, what your property looks like, what systems are appropriate for that property, what your budget is. There's lots of options out there. Tanya, I'm in Centralia, Washington. Anyone here in my area feeling a bit lonely out here in the wet climate? Okay, guys, well, that brings us to the end of the show today. Hopefully that gave you guys some insights and some value. If you found that valuable, please hit the like button. If you're not already subscribed to the Verge channel, please do that. It'll keep you updated on our weekly shows. I'm going to be live again on YouTube at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, teaching my Introduction to Permaculture, Part 5 this week. Would love to see you guys there. If there are any specific questions or topics that you want me to cover in future videos, I'd love to do that. And if you're interested in taking our free introduction, or it's actually called the Permaculture Primer, it's a 4-hour free e-course. It's in the show notes below. It's a bit.ly link, the first link right at the top of this video right now. You can go there and sign up for that. It gives you the choice of 2 courses, one on designing resilient homes, acreages, and farms, and one which is our very basic 3-hour introduction to permaculture, which you can take at your leisure. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you have an incredible week. We'll see you guys on Wednesday evening for Part 5 of the Introduction to Permaculture.